Hi, everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear me well. Thank you so much for being here today, and as well as you three, of course. In awe of three of you always. I've watched your journey both up close from afar, so moderating this panel, I'm sure I'm going to learn something, and hopefully you all will learn something today as well. We'd also welcome you to Makeway. This is sort of our new space we've been in for a year now, so having all these faces in here and these powerhouses in sports is an honor for us. This is why we built this space. This is why we wanted to have a space like this. So excited to have you all here and to facilitate this conversation. We really want to talk today not just about the sports industry and building a career in sports, but that intersectionalism between sports and entrepreneurship, which I think we all have in common here. For me, this is such a personal topic. So many of my jobs over the years with the Raptors was focused around empowering our players, both young in their careers, but as they're finishing their careers, to evaluate what life outside of being an athlete looks like, and sort of helping them explore their passions, but also set up foundations and groundworks for them to be able to successfully transition out of playing basketball, whatever that might look like. And I realized about 5 years ago that it was very hypocritical of me to be teaching and preaching that while I had my own entrepreneurship dreams and things that I wanted to accomplish that I was putting on the back burner because I had a full-time job. And so that's been a personal journey for me, which is why I'm so excited to facilitate this conversation with the three of you, and also sort of hear your paths. So I'm just going to get right into it because nobody came here to hear me speak other than me. So what I really want to focus on in the beginning is sort of the ground level of all of this and the transition that I think all three of you have gone through at different points in your careers, from whether it be being an athlete to becoming an entrepreneur or being in one part of sports business into another. So maybe, Megan, we can start on the other end with you, and what inspired you to start Stathletes, and then also how did you make the shift from your previous life in sports tech into owning your own sports tech company?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I love being in Toronto because I see so many people here along the way in my journey. Youngwoo, Mars, Ashton from so many years ago. Just such a supportive group in Canada. So to really start in entrepreneurship in university, where I had a lot of the framework, a lot of professors, people that were willing to chip in to figure out, okay, so you have an idea, you have 3 people, 3 co-founders. What does that look like? How do you actually scale? How do you find product market fit? How do you drive revenue? All of those great things. And we were very naive. I think you are when you're young, right? You think you can do anything, scale is easy, and clients will come. And there was a lot of hard knocks along the way. So we started Stathletes pitching it 15 years ago. And I think everyone thinks, that overnight success is that 10-year sprint. All of a sudden you wake up and you're a millionaire. But there were a lot of punches to the face along the way in scale, including being part of Mars. We were Lazaritas in their growth fund. I've been on Women in Tech missions. I spoke at the first woman conference in Lithuania for the Canadian government. So done a lot of really cool stuff as well. But certainly my journey was incredibly nonlinear. I learned a lot along the way, and building from 3 to 20 to now we're about 200 people in headcount, and still mainly in Canada.
Yeah, we were talking about that last night, and Megan and I have known each other for a long time, and I was like, how many people do you have working for you now? She's like, 200. I was like, oh, we have 15, and I find that overwhelming. So that number is staggering, but seeing the growth over the years has been incredible. When you talk about transition, Nadia, this is for you. I know in sort of the early parts of your career, you focus a lot more on brand building, and we know athletes are brands in this day and age, but building a brand for a company versus building a brand for an individual are two very different things. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that transition and what sort of pushed you into that space and what the differences are between the two, because I think there's a lot of differences.
There are a lot of commonalities. My background has largely been in consumer goods and public relations, and I've always been a sports fan. I grew up a Leaf fan. I've grown up in Toronto, and in 2012, I learned about the Canadian national soccer teams. And from going to that first game, it did something to me that I can't even explain. The passion of the fans and the community was really what drew me in. And I found myself in every consumer campaign that I was running, always trying to find an athlete or an angle where we can involve sports in some kind of way, because sports has such a unique way of bringing people together. And in a day like today, where the world is so divisive, I find something so poetic about sports and the country coming together, like what we just saw with the men's national team in Copa America and that miraculous run that they just had. So it started as a passion, and as I continued to grow throughout my career and doing these campaigns, I had one opportunity with a brand partnership where I reached out to an athlete, and his manager actually asked to meet me and was like, I don't have a lot of experience here in Toronto, and you seem to know a lot about sports, so would you be interested in consulting? And I started consulting on the side, and maybe about 2 years ago, I made the transition of managing athletes full-time, and it's been probably the greatest joy of my life because it's exactly what I've always wanted to do. And people that have known me for the last 15 years that I've been in this industry, I think no one was surprised when I said, okay, well, I'm managing Canadian soccer players that are playing in Europe and helping them tell their stories, because it's always been something that I've done, whether or not I was in the space or not.
Amazing. Yeah, no, that's like the sports industry has shifted so much, and athletes, you know, it used to just be that the marquee athletes of each league had a brand, and now like you could be the 10th player on the bench and on any team and have your own brand and your own community of people that you can mobilize. And I think so many of our athletes are realizing those opportunities, and so having people like you to enable those opportunities and provide like guidance and a path to that is really important. So keeping on the theme of transition, you know, you being a former Canadian national rugby team player, go Canada, as we're on the eve of the Olympics coming up. So talk a little bit about your transition of being like a high performance athlete into being an entrepreneur, and then also like why do you think athletes are sort of best fit to transition to the entrepreneurship life? And I think they're built for it, and I'm a true believer in that, so I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so just to take a step back, my company, EQ, is an influencer athlete marketing agency. A little bit of a mouthful, but we dabble in influencer and athlete marketing. In terms of my career and why I kind of started that company, yes, my background in sports, and I got to play rugby at a very high level, but I also started my marketing career when I was 18 years old, working for a guy named Robert Herjavec. He's a shark on Shark's Tank, a dragon on Dragon's Den, and what I took from that time is, you know, what he used to tell me is, let's leverage my reputation to make revenue, i.e. influencer marketing, but nobody called it that at the time. So working with Robert for 6 years and taking those learnings as well as my sports background, I decided to start my own company, EQ, to bring those forces together, i.e. marketing, i.e. sports, and influence and reputation to revenue. And then I think the things that really correlate in terms of my transition, two big things, like number one, we have a saying at the company, winners win, meaning from a sports perspective, you like to win more than you hate to lose. And so you're really focused on winning, and you're winning for your clients internally and your brand clients externally. And then also next play mentality. I think that's one of the biggest things. When you're an athlete, something goes bad, you have to pivot really quickly. Like your teammates don't want to hear about it, your coach doesn't want to hear about it, nobody cares, next play. So I think that really has translated to my success in business and our team's success in business. So we take that kind of along the way as we're helping our clients.
And just as a follow-up to that, I see a lot of young people in the room, and I'm going to assume some of them are athletes. So what do you think are some of the most transitional skills that, because so many athletes as they're transitioning out have spent a lot of time devoting to their craft and not a lot of time working traditional jobs. And that's, you know, when you enter into the workforce and you're trying to sort of map out what skills you had in that space that would apply to this new space, like what would you give advice to those young athletes that are trying to take those skills and almost market them for their next step in whatever the path they're choosing?
Sure, yeah, and I think, you know, social media for me has presented the biggest opportunity. I think we'd be silly to ignore it in terms of what that next step can look like for young athletes. I was going to speak to this a little bit later, but we'll talk about it now. Statistically, only 3% of NCAA athletes actually become professional athletes. And I know NCAA is, you know, US specific, but let's not kid ourselves. There's a lot of Canadians that go there. So if there's 3% of professional athletes, there's a massive percentage that don't become professional athletes, but as you're doing that, you're garnering social media and building a following. And I think the world of influence and social media management and or even on the back end or front end presents a tremendous opportunity. And then I think athletes, again, being super competitive, whatever you bring to the table, you're always going to want to win. So I think that translates. And again, I was 18 years old when I started with Robert. I knew nothing about nothing, but what he did see in me is my desire to want to be better than the next person. And that was exciting for him. So he brought me in. So I think those are the things that I would encourage people to lean into.
Yeah. And I think in, you know, keeping with the same trend of like how sports and entrepreneurship are so similar, you know, nobody ever wins every game they ever play. Mm-hmm. Nobody ever wins every award. And so I think what's so similar of the athletic and the entrepreneurship journey is the fact that, like Megan was talking about earlier, there's a lot of punches to the face, there's a lot of kicks to the gut, and sort of what I want to segue into with you guys is talking a little bit about what's not easy in those journeys. So Megan, specifically for you in starting a sports tech company and raising capital, like what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced? And then on the back end of that question, what are some advantages that you felt that you've had by probably not being the traditional tech sports founder? And I think all of us sitting up here have been a minority in the room working in sports more than one time. And so as much as I want to focus on what are those challenges that you faced, also talk about some of the advantages that you have by looking different and being different than a lot of the founders in those spaces.
Definitely, I thought things would get easier once I hit certain thresholds. So I was like, oh, I've made it. What a great paycheck. Or I have this many employees. Then you realize there's so many more plateaus. And as Canadians, we usually sell our companies at like the $10 to $100 million valuations. And it's very nice because you have a great retirement. You don't have to worry about it. But you look into other countries, especially the US, where they really want to push for unicorns and taking money off the table and security off the table and really going for it. So I think being a woman from Ontario, from Toronto, and just going like, I don't care, I'm going to figure it out. And at each step, you just keep hammering down on what our core values are, right? Which is like resiliency, it's grit. We're a small country in a larger country. As a woman too, yeah, there's been a lot of disrespect over the years. I think that's just very easy to say. And whether that's women athletes or women in business, I think we share a commonality that, we're not only underrepresented, we're underpaid, we're undervalued, and we deserve a bigger seat at the table. So I kick down whatever door thinking who comes behind me hopefully has that door open too. And just don't take no for an answer. Like I always think no is not yet. I just don't quit. And if I have something that I want to achieve in terms of like client segments, I go out and get them. And in some respects, it's more important on who you focus on and not just taking on anyone, but really going for that like niche client in sports that you can scale outwards.
Yeah, we were talking about, yes. Round of applause for that. I was picking Megan's brain last night about exactly that, about funding and like how do you do it in such a targeted, specific way. And I think there's so many resources out there and there's so many things out there, but finding the right fit is always like very important. Nadia, for you, the athlete marketing space has changed drastically, I think, just in the last decade, and especially in the last 5 years, NIL, all of these things that have changed the sports landscape. With what you do with athlete management and so many people trying to get a piece of the pie more than ever, what are some of the challenges that you have in trying to build, I would say, a streamlined strategy with all of these external forces that are sort of nipping at the ankles of athletes today?
Absolutely. One thing that we definitely struggle with are all the external influences. Sometimes you've grown up with your friend's older brother who thinks that he's an expert because he might be a fan, and you grew up with him, so you trust him implicitly. And kind of for us, it's getting to know our athletes and spending a lot of time with them, getting to know their families, and really creating that safe space for them that they can trust us in such a way that we can help guide them the way that they need to be guided. But when you have 6 different people trying to pull you in 6 different directions, it gets very messy. And you'll see that with athletes and just the cohesiveness of their overall strategy. There is no strategy. They'll be taking deals left, right, and center. There's no really media relations that are happening, which I think is a huge problem here with our professional athletes. And then their content is very much driven by on ice, on-field performance. And again, there should be some sort of cohesiveness, and we love to build those strategies where we have an internal social media team. We build their content strategies that also level up to what we want to do in the media space, and that's why publications like Glory, and we work a lot with The Shift and Kayla Gray, and telling those stories is so important. So it really does come down to trust, and that takes time for us. It takes time to build those relationships and kind of having those families and friends trust enough to just take a step back and let us do what we do best.
Do you find, because this is a personal experience for me, do you find that being a female in that space sometimes is a easier laneway to building trust? Because I've felt over the years and working with athletes, there's so many men in our space that look and have similar experiences and similar backgrounds.
Yep.
When you're different and you can approach it with a different mindset, has that been an advantage to you over the years?
It has with the athletes. Agents, not so much, to be transparent. Agents who have been around for a long time are a little reluctant to kind of release those reins, but with the athlete and that creating that connection, it's actually worked in my advantage, only because, we have a client, I work with Jonathan David, who plays for Canada and then also plays in Lille, and his sister was like, you treat him like I would treat him, in the sense that you're like a big sister to him. And sure enough, when I'm in Lille and he gets tackled, I am on my chair, like ready to rip someone apart, and it's like that big sister comes out in me. And afterwards, he'll come out in the locker room and he'll just be like, I'm okay. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But there is a protective nature that I feel like as a woman, we definitely can, it can definitely work in our advantage. So for sure, that's been an advantage for me.
Amazing. Yeah, for a while on Raptors Twitter, people were calling me Suge Knight because I was always the person like blocking people, and I was like, wow, this is really great. So we worked all these years for and education and all of that to be labeled a bodyguard. Dakota, for you, I know you deal in sort of more influencer marketing, and I think that term is so broad, but so much of it is rooted in the digital space, as you know, and I know you do a lot of in-person stuff as well. But talk about the ever-changing landscape of the digital space. Like TikTok was not a thing that you monetized or used for influencer marketing 5 years ago, and now it's the thing. Talk a little bit about helping athletes keep up with those changes, and also how you keep up with those changes to help your athletes continue to grow their brand and adapt with the ever-changing landscape that is the digital world.
Yeah, and I think it's a good segue into something I want to talk about that might not be so popular as we're here at the Sports Summit to speak about athletes and professional athletes, but I do want to have a conversation about sports adjacent influencers and creators, because your question is around TikTok and social media and these different platforms that are coming up. And I think today we're in a space where I represent a lot of professional athletes, I represent Olympians, and I'm about them, and we're going to cheer them on in Paris in a couple weeks. However, from a business perspective, and from a brand perspective, there is, massive sports adjacent influencers popping up in the space that have just as much pull and just as much influence, maybe more, exactly, than the professional athletes. I'll give you an example. Our team represents a young basketball creator in the city named K Showtime. He blew up for going viral playing Drake in his house and doing these massive basketball takeovers. I know NBA Canada's here. They've worked with Showtime. Bose did a massive event with Showtime as well for All-Star Weekend, and that's not because he's a professional athlete, and he's never going to be. However, he has the customer base and the consumer base on TikTok and on Instagram to drive that. So my challenge to brands today would be, when you're thinking about dabbling in the world of sports, absolutely consider professional athletes. We have to have a two-prong approach. The Olympians, the professional athletes, but also consider those sports adjacent influencers, and then having your strategy combine both of those, because then you're tackling everybody. I have people from my team here today. Everybody's under 30. If I ask anybody to raise their hand who has cable, nobody's going to raise their hand. Traditional media is dying. I hope nobody from Bell or Rogers is here, but the reality is it is. And so when you think about, traditional endorsement deals with Olympians and athletes that are at a very high stature, and we have one on our roster, Brandy Wilkerson, beach volleyball Olympian, who does massive deals, but a lot of these deals are TV, commercial, billboard, editorial, print, and we love them, but respectfully, they're not dabbling into the consumer that they're thinking they are, because people under 30 aren't paying attention to those things. But if they dabbled into the NCAA beach volleyball athletes who have massive TikTok followings, then they would. And I think a big example of that is Olivia Dunn. For those who don't know who that is, she's the 4th ranked gymnast at LSU, but is the number 1, most profitable NCAA athlete. And it's not because she's the best; it's because she has the biggest following. And I don't know if she'll make Team USA ever, but she doesn't really care, because that's not the end game. So I think those are the opportunities in sports that I want to challenge people to think about, not leaving behind our professional athletes, of course, but always thinking about sports adjacent people too.
Yeah, and I think that's, I guess if you're not an athlete, you are sports adjacent in a lot of ways. And I know that's maybe a controversial, not great opinion, but not everybody is out there performing. There's way more people in the wings. There's way more people, behind the scenes than there are on the court. And I think all of those people are sports adjacent, if we're going to really call it the way it is.
Sure.
To wrap this up, really, with each of you, I'd love to hear a little bit about what's next for each of your companies, and also what do you think is next in the industry that you're in. Megan, maybe we can start with you. you in the sports tech space?
Well, I'll jump back into this conversation just for 1 second because I actually coached in the NHL All-Star for like 4 hours, influencers, and they were amazing. My team Swaggy P, we lost. I'm a terrible coach. So if you're an influencer, sports adjacent, I'm not going to help you. I need the Olympians. But it was awesome. Like there were so many people out there. We got a lot of actually Olympians who were like grading them on like their trick shots. It was like unbelievable. Yeah. And they have like millions of followers. So it's like figuring out how to monetize those alongside athletes, I think is like the key to like improving the whole space, right? Yes. You make the space bigger for everyone. From my side, I'm data as a service, software as a service. I like to call myself a little sassy sometimes, but mostly data as a service. So it's a tech joke. Sorry, wrong crowd. For me, it's just like drilling down on like, you know, the profitable big segments. So 98% of our revenue is outside of Canada, sports books, digital, everything we're talking about too, all the influencer side, just figuring out different ways to monetize the data that we collect and providing better, more efficient ways of data. So looking at computer vision, automation. I know AI, Gen AI is such a big topic, but it really is. It really takes, you know, away some of the manual overlay and allows you to expedite a lot of data products. So really excited for the future of bringing, you know, hockey to a lot more people, making it more accessible, understandable, and creating all sorts of content around data.
Amazing. Nadia?
We're just halfway through the off season for a lot of our NHL clients, so really planning for next season in terms of content strategies and public relations, media relations campaigns going into budget dumping season come September and then 2025 as well. A lot of our strategy for next summer is around the philanthropic efforts for our NHL players. And what we've been really encouraging and succeeding with is encouraging them to stop with the golf tournaments.
Please, no more golf.
Absolutely, but every NHL player
every hockey player has a golf tournament.
Yeah.
Every basketball player has a charity game.
Exactly. We've been really encouraging them to just get a little more creative. So we've been providing a lot of interesting and fun campaigns. We wanted to bring a bunch of NHL players together to do like a Pilates session, record it, and then have people come and donate and sponsor them. We've got a really big campaign coming up around literacy for one of our NHL players, and we're really excited about that. And then the Canadian national team guys are going into their international break come up in September as we look towards 2026 in the World Cup, which is going to be a really big deal in Toronto. And we're about, a year and a half away, and there's still a ways to go, especially with construction and the Gardner situation.
Logistics.
And BMO Field. And yeah, there's a lot to do between now and 2026, but we just launched a podcast for two of our players, Jonathan David and Kyle Laren, and really helping them tell their story outside of a federation, outside of their teams, and provide almost like an educational moment for fans who might not have been following them for the last 5 years, 2 years, and just maybe have discovered them within the last month, which has been really, really fun for us because it's another way of providing content and developing content outside of TikTok, Instagram, and I mean, we're not really focused on X anymore, but yeah.
That's a wild place now. Dakota?
Yeah, so for me, I think our team is just really hyper-focused on growth and continuing to bring on new talent, continuing to work with key brands. I think a major focus for us is kind of, again, on that sports creator world of making sure that we're aligning with talent who, yes, are great at their sport, but might not make it to the league and are building that following along the way. We work with a young athlete. She goes to Duke University. Her name's Emma Coble. Of course, with the NCAA NIL stuff, this is very exciting. They can now monetize. What's great about Emma is, again, she has, the dream of going to the WNBA, but if she doesn't, that's okay too, because she's building that following along the way. The conversation we always have with these young creators and young athletes is, okay, how do you become a professional athlete? Okay, well, be that 1% of 1% who's super extraordinary and has a great skill set. Have a dad who's famous and can call their GM to get you on the team, and or grow a very big following. So those are the three ways, and I think for us, we're focused on the latter to ensure that people are able to get there. So that's our focus for the company, and I'm excited to do that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you all for your attention, and well, thank you to you three. I'm, always in awe of you guys from afar and up close, and I've learned something today, and I hope you all have as well. So we appreciate everybody's attention, and I'm going to kick it back over to Lance to get on to our next programming.
Yeah, a big round of applause for everyone.